All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. In this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about the mix of Heavy Hearted by Tim Hughes, Aker, and Sam Weisman. Um, just to start off here, as I wrote it here, this is not really a true demo mix. I just wanted to like show a before and after because I kind of want to I think it's cool to like show like this type of before and after because it demonstrates in like 30 seconds how much difference does mixing make to a track. But to be fair, this is not really a demo mix. It's just the individual stems just stacked on top of each other, and it's exported like this. Let's dive into it. This is a 7.5 hours long video, so I'm not gonna go through everything. Maybe I'm going to pick like 5 things that I think are worth explaining, and yeah, that's gonna be about it. It otherwise would be like way too long. So just to start off, I received the stems, and I to be honest, like I much prefer this way because there are basically two types of producers who send any mix engineer or any sort of projects to work on. One side is going to be like very much used to how the rough mix is sounding, so they will reference everything to the rough mix, and if something is not sounding like the rough mix is, it's going to be like wrong in their eyes. And I just think I can do much less good in a situation like this. I can probably still improve the track, and I wouldn't say that it's not worth it, but in situations like this, my job is harder, and I feel that I don't have as much control. However, on the other side, which is like, for example, this project, and I believe I can do like a much better job, and I can your money is much better spent in a way, if I can make it, if I can say it like this. If I just receive the stems and I'm free to like basically execute whatever I think would be best for the track, both in terms of like touching the production a little bit if I need to, and in terms of like incorporating my taste, because at the end of the day, like again, this is just my opinion, but if you're paying a mix engineer, then you're not really paying for balancing. Like if you just like, if you're happy with your production and you just want to balance it, then your money is much better spent in terms of like studio time. Like bring your laptop to the studio, pay for 2 hours of time, and like do it yourself, because you can do it. Like balancing itself is just a matter of you hearing everything correctly. If you hear the low end correctly, if you hear the mids correctly, the highs correctly, and you can most likely do this as long as you have a like a vision of how you want your track to sound. But if you also want someone to like come in and do the individual channels, like correct issues, maybe if there's something with like phase issues, or like recreate something which you cannot really recreate, you maybe don't have some sense, like and also like a mix engineer, like strictly a mix engineer, like when you're paying a mix engineer, you're, in my opinion, you're paying for the taste that they are going to give to your track. And it's not really only about the balancing, because the balancing, as I've said, I don't think that's the hard part. I think the hard part is having a vision for the track and being able to execute like a coherent and cohesive, like all the stems should be like working towards the same goal, so this is, I think, what's the hard part. And you can and every single person who's doing mixing have a different like taste, and a different vision, and a different like conceptual idea about how they want things to sound. And I also have my own, and I think this is a good thing, and I think this is what's worth the money, to put it like this. And yeah, in the case of this project, it was like this, that I received the stems and I got basically like complete freedom of what I'm going to do with it, as long as it obviously fits the chill your mind sound. And I'm also not going too overboard with my changes. And to be fair, I didn't really do like too many changes to the production. I did a couple of things, most notably probably because the vocal chop in the drop was spread to left right instead of like centered, and then just sterilized a little bit. But with every single vocal things, and let's talk about this a little bit. With every single like vocal channel, basically a lead vocal channel, which is going to be like the most important, and it's going to, it should be, in my opinion, at least sit kind of on top of everything. The vocals not necessarily need to be the loudest part, but they should be the most understandable part in any production. And so in my opinion, at least, they should come from the middle. And this is not really because of like most people are obviously listening at this point in time in stereo. So the problem is not that the information is coming from left, right, or whatnot, but every time you do this, it creates a little bit of this phasiness and a little bit of this. It just takes away a little bit from the understandability, and this is why I prefer to. Whenever I hear stuff like this, it's like whether we can solve it by somehow summing the source to mono and then figure out a way how we can recover the side information without too much damage, or we can or if what I did here is if I have access to the dry lead vocal stem, then I will try to recreate how these problematic parts sounded like, and this is what I did in terms of like production change. Other than this, I haven't really changed all that much. I also like just tried out and showed him my suggestion with the bass line in the drop, and yeah, he liked it, so we ended up keeping it. But also that it's not really a huge change. It's their stems at the end of the day. I just edited the audio a little bit. Yeah, so let me just go through a little bit. So here, this is exactly what I'm doing. This is the sub bass, and I just yeah, I just tried out a slightly different progression because the breakdown progression in terms of the bass was different than the drop. And again, this is my vision, like again for songs. It's like I prefer to uniformize things a little bit. I don't necessarily want everything to be same all the time, so a little bit of variation is good, but at the foundational level, I want a song to have a a set progression and have an identity, so to speak, and then we can create variations over that. But that one, I think, has to be like kind of stable in terms of a pop song, because in a pop song, again, this is just my 2 cents, but I personally think that in a pop song you don't really want all that much variation, unless that's the whole point, that you want to be like really breaking the norms and whatnot. But in the case of this track, I just felt this kind of sounded better to me, like this, just simply put, with having the drop playing the same progressions as the breakdown. So this is why I did it and showed it to Tim, and yeah, we ended up agreeing on this one later on. And this is the point where I'm recreating the vocal chops, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you can like watch the whole video and see how I did it. It's sometimes it's time consuming, but at the end of the day, it's almost always worth the effort, because the end result is going to sound like just so much better. That yeah, it's just worth the time, in my opinion, every time to recreate stuff whenever it's needed to be recreated. Okay, so at this part in the video, I moved on to the lead vocals, and because they are completely dry, and this is why I much prefer, like, once again, I know like this side of the artist is like they are so used to their reverbs and delays, and they don't want anything to be changed about them, and I respect that. But once again, I can do a much better correctional job if I receive dry vocal stems, because stuff like this can only be done on dry stems, really. Like I'm time stretching, pitch correcting, fixing some rhythms and timings and whatnot. It's not really possible to do this with wet stems. And so yeah, this is what I'm doing here. Once again, I think this is kind of important, especially the rhythm part. If you don't fix the pitch, autotune can like solve some of your problems. But again, I prefer to like do manually as many things as I possibly can, because it's just going to sound better if I have a little bit more control. I much prefer to use Ableton than Melodyne. Maybe like this is, like everyone has their own choice in terms of like pitch correction. I'm much more comfortable with Ableton, and because of the like you have these complex pro and beats and all these other warping functions, and I 99% of the time I'm going to use complex pro, but sometimes I need the complex, sometimes I need just to have it on repitch, sometimes I need to have it like on a different texture setting, for example, if I want like a something accentuated, for example. So yeah, I'm much more comfortable editing audio, vocal audio with Ableton like this. With Melodyne, I don't feel that I have all that much control. It's a nice algorithm, but it's not as nice, in my opinion, as what Ableton does. So yeah, this is what I'm doing here, and Yeah, so I recreated the vocals, and I was referencing the original vocal structure because I also received uh, a stem with the whole vocal thing laid on top of each other to reference it over the instrumental stems. And yeah, once I was done with recreating the structure, I started basically the mixing process. And something I just spotted here while searching for the track is that the original stem export, as I've said, was a little bit in terms of the chops, it was a little bit phasing. However, this was like very easy to take to my own advantage in terms of like once I have the recreated chop, I can use this phasey export to enhance the side information of the vocal chop. And this is exactly what I did. Like every time it says like heavy hearted, I added this additional layering to it, and it's yeah, it just brings out the sides while still keeping the mono, like not necessarily mono but mono compatible information in the middle. One thing I felt that the track was also like needing it a little bit was another like a little bit more emphasis on the drop impacts. And so this is why I get this question all the time. I use Ableton basically for sampling, like the sampler part of this. Like I can just use it much better as a sample library than how would you be able to use Logic's sample library. And also I use it for audio editing. But other than this, I prefer to produce in Logic. I could still produce in Ableton. I used to do it for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. Before that, even before that, I used FL Studio for, I don't know, probably another 3-4 years. But at this point in time, and especially on Mac, I just think that it's kind of a nightmare to use FL Studio on a Mac. So I much prefer to work with Logic, both in terms of workflow, and it's just much easier. So this is just a basic white noise impact sound. However, how I made it like much bigger, so to say, is that I added this reverb. And yeah, you can listen what I'm doing here. Sounds like this. So yeah, this reverb basically creates like this long tail to this impact sound, and this is what I felt was working really good with the track. And so yeah, transient designing basically to once again, like the compression is doing the same thing. I'm just trying to amp up the tail of it a little bit, and the transient designer is in this case not really for the transient, but it's for the sustain part of the sample. So here I'm just tidying up the lead vocals a little bit so that you can see there are these little like breaths and like miscellaneous sounds that maybe you won't need, and also like a couple loudness corrections. For example, like this particular word needs to be brought up a little bit in level, and I much prefer to do it like this hard committing way, in a sense that I increase the gain like this, as you can see it on the screen, and I'm committing it into the audio file itself instead of automation. This is just my preferred way of doing it, because, well, partly because Logic doesn't really do automation that well, to be honest. Sometimes it's the latencies are a little bit getting all over the place. Sometimes it forgets to correct the right amount of time. But also, like, I just think that this is a much better way to like being able to like see on the waveform if everything is at the same level or not. To me, it just makes much more sense in terms of like visually speaking, to just just look through the stem, and I can like instantly see if something is right or not. So this is another reason why I'm doing it like this. Yeah, here later on I created what I talked about this previously. This phasing layer on top of the recreated chops, and I added this delay just so once again to like a little bit. This is again my taste, but I prefer to have these transition points. So you have the breakdown, you have another part of the breakdown, you then maybe have another like bridging part, like uplifting part, and then you have the drop part, another part of the drop part, and all between all these like 16 or like 8 bars, or like however you prefer to think about this, you have these little transition points, and I either want them to be like really like flowing together so that one part leads to the next part, or I want like a very direct cut whenever that's part of the concept. But here I felt that the breakdown wants to lead over to the drop, and this is why, as you can hear it there, just those two last parts here are being delayed so that these flow over to the next period, therefore giving this feeling of continuity over the transitioning point, which I just think that it's important to do it. Now with ad-libs and yeah, just harmonies and doubles and all these like complementing layers in general to the lead vocal, I will be in most cases much more free, and I'm not too worried about like having everything coming from the middle or whatnot. And with the doubles especially, because double layers, like the whole point of having a doubling layer but the doubling layer is that it's playing the same info as the lead vocal. It's just another take of it. And the whole point of it is that you can put it to the left and the right and emphasize a little bit the lead vocal itself. But with ad-libs, I'm not always going to do this left-right stuff. Sometimes I'm going to keep it in the middle, but it also like kind of depends on the track at hand. In this case, I kept it in the middle, but I also like stereoized it, and there's a lot more ping pong delay and a lot more reverb on it than on the lead vocal. And yeah, for good reason, because I want it to be a little bit more floating instead of being coming from the middle and 100% understandability. You don't really need lyrics understandability with like oh and stuff like this. It's just an ad-lib stamp, so I'm going to be as I've said, I'm going to be much more free with it and much more I want it to have a floating feel. And whether it comes on top of the lead vocal sometimes or it stays under, that's more of a conceptual thing. And it's you can judge it in a track by track basis, because with certain tracks you don't want the ad-libs to come over or the lead vocals, and in certain other tracks it sounds good to maybe the ad-libs are flowing over a little bit of the lead vocals. It's going to be different with every single track. Here I would say they are playing the same level, kind of. Maybe later on I will pull back from this a little bit if I remember correctly, but yeah, it's like they are. It's a little bit like a question and an answer type of situation. How I felt it was working the best. So about the output processing, I talked about this in previous videos as well, but just to like run through it like really quickly, I'm starting with a bus compressor. In this case, it's the SSLG bus emulation from UAD. Then there's an EQ, the massive passive. Then there's another compressor, the volume U. Once again, these are all from UAD, and these are all analog unit emulations. And the reason I'm using these in many situations is because because they are the best for the job, in my opinion. But like they all have like a specific sound that they give to the track. And in terms of output compression, I much prefer to have two compressors doing, let's say, 2 dB of compression each, than to have like one compressor that's doing 4. Because to me, at least, in whatever I tried in the past is like, whenever I have one compressor that's doing more work instead of having 2 or maybe sometimes even 3, it depends on the track really, doing a little bit of each, to me that always sounds much more cohesive and sounds much more still much more human. And also I can choose a little bit like faster detection whenever I'm starting. So on the G bus, I'm usually using a relatively fast attack and a relatively fast release, just to make sure that I'm catching more transients. And then on the Manly, I'm usually a little bit like slower, not necessarily with the release, but with the attack. And yeah, after these 2 units are there, usually the track is sounding cohesive enough that I only need the limiter to like later on put the final glue on it, or like, I don't know how to say this, because at the end of the day a limiter is also a compressor, so it's also going to have a sound. It's just a much more aggressive sound. And so yeah, it just helps create the limiter also like this like a much better working condition, because they because then the limiter doesn't have to work as hard if you have like proper dynamics set up beforehand. And the dynamic EQ is exactly for this purpose. I don't necessarily think the low end is too much, or in like many cases, like I don't, whenever I'm in the flow and I'm mixing a track, I feel it, whether a low end is too much or not. So maybe in this instance, it might have been too much. I don't exactly remember. But the whole concept behind using a dynamic EQ to do what I'm doing here with the low end especially, is that once once the signal is reaching the limiter, low end information has a much more severe effect on a limiter. So like as long as you can, and the dynamic EQ is basically the best tool for this type of job. As long as you can lighten up a little bit the low end of your signal, then the end limiter is going to be very happy about this, because it has to it's going to be able to leave more transients and just leave more stereo information, leave a lot more naturalness. Like it's really hard to describe this phenomenon, but the whole point that I want you to kind of understand is that the more low end info you're pushing into the limiter, the harder it's going to affect the rest of the frequency range. And if you want clarity, especially in like these types of ranges, and of course higher above, but the higher you go, the limiter is much more forgiving. But if you want clarity in these middle ranges, and to everything to sound like understandable and just how you imagined it in the mixing stage without any sort of limiting at the end, if you want clarity in those ranges, then you want to like make sure that the low end is controlled and you tame it well. And as I've said, a dynamic EQ is a pretty good tool for this job, because it has the power to create the impression that you still have a lot of low end, because it's just partially removing it and it's also constantly moving. But at the same time, your limiter is 100% feeling the effect of 1 dB of reduction, and even if it's just half a dB, it's going to be it's going to create a substantial effect on the rest of the frequency spectrum. And so a couple of these delays I also added whenever there's a gap, at least in my opinion, with vocal with tracks that are based around like vocals. I prefer to not leave too many gaps if I don't have to, because in those parts I just feel that the track is going to die down a little bit. So I just want to keep the track moving, especially this is in the breakdown parts, but the same generally applies in the drop parts, unless you have like a very substantial lead that takes over this leading duties from the vocals. However, what I did here is, as you just heard, I just added this little delay here. So this is the same vocal phrase, take away the pain again, and with lots of reverb, lots of delays, and it sounds distant, but still keeps this flow going, so that there's no gap for these, like one bar basically. And there's lots of other little things like this, but to be fair, the production was already like very good in terms of like this. It was very well thought out, in my opinion at least, so that I didn't really have to make a lot of these things. It's just that whenever I felt that this was possible, I tried it out and I sent it over to Tim, whether he agreed with my my take on it or not. And yeah, this is how it ended up. At this point, the track was pretty much done in terms of mixing. Later on, I went on to, if I remember correctly, I was messing a little bit with trying to like get a little bit more loudness out of it. I felt it was a tiny bit too dynamic for what I felt would have been right, and also like the level difference between the drops and the breakdowns was a little bit too much. Maybe this is not even on footage anymore. I don't 100% remember. I think I forgot to actually film this, but in the end, so the breakdowns were like this and the drops were like this, and I moved them a little bit closer to each other, just so there's not that much of a the impact of the drop was ironically a little bit too much, and so I just dialed back down a little bit from it. About this this limiting, this is put on the all vocals channel, and this is just so to catch these overflowing peaks, and it's set on safe mode. It's not really going to be like super audible. It's never going to cause any sort of distortion. It's really just a safety tool so that the vocals don't create subtle distortion at the output limiting level. Because sometimes what happens, especially in the breakdown parts, if you once again, this issue is mostly being created by heavy basses, but I prefer to have like appropriate low end both in the breakdown parts and both in the drop parts. So what can sometimes happen is that if there's a sudden peak in the lead vocals, and there's also kind of a heavy bottom end, like in terms of like a Reese bass or whatever, like just a simple sine pad can be this. So these things are playing together, and there's a sudden peak, then it might distort a little bit. And with this, this is basically just a precaution, so that if later on when I try to raise the level or like the perceived loudness of the drop a little bit, I'm going to be able to do this without any sort of distortion. And this is not really going to have any substantial effect on the sound itself in most cases. Sometimes, like if I were to go in and do heavier limiting on it, like heavier peak catching, so to speak, that might end up being audible, like more substantially audible, because this is, at the end of the day, this is also going to be like a little bit audible, that you're catching these transients, but it's not going to, like, you won't be able to tell unless you heard it before without it. So yeah, but this is basically just a precaution to avoid any sort of distortion later on. And with the radio edit, I also did a little bit of a trickery. So the whole point is that I tried to automate the threshold of the maximizer and also the ceiling, but I didn't manage to do this properly, because it was like making this clicking noise whenever I tried to do this. Yeah, I think it was somewhere around here. Or maybe, sorry, this is the bass group, so not the output. I need the output limiter. Okay, I don't know where it is in the footage, but the point is that the whole concept behind it is I was trying to automate the threshold a little bit, not just the threshold, but also the character. However, it was making these clicking noises or whatnot. It just wasn't, I just wasn't able to automate it. That's the whole point. And so for the drops, I kept it relatively fast, and for the breakdowns, I kept it relatively slow, like around this range exactly. Because the whole thing is that the faster that you can keep your output limiter, the more it can let through all the transients, and everything is going to sound much more like just natural. You know, like the slower you put your limiter, the more noticeable its effects are going to be. So with the breakdown parts, it's not really a problem that the limiter's effects are noticeable, because there's not as many transients, there's not as many, it's not that important to do this. And however, what's much more important in a breakdown part is that there's absolutely zero distortion, because there's no kick, there's no sub bass, there's no high overflowing leads, there's no hi-hats that are, you know, like these things are going to mask distortion even if there's any in a drop. So you can go like pretty fast with your maximizer in there. However, in the breakdown parts, it's much more important to optimize to have as little distortion as possible. So in these parts, I kept this character in the slower range, and I later on then exported these two, because automation was not possible, as I've said, because of it was making up some clicking noises. I don't know, maybe it's not even possible. I remember I did this in the past with automation without any problems, so maybe it was just the problem in this particular session that I tried to do this. But it doesn't matter. I just bounced out both one whole export with the character set like this, and with the character set like this, much faster to below 1. And then I used the drop with this fast and character, and then the breakdowns with the slow character, and I just puzzled out the audio file like this, and that's how the radio edit ended up. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, if you're curious about the whole process, watch the whole video. If maybe you have any questions about any individual part, please just leave a comment either under this video or that video, and I will try to answer it to the best of my abilities. And yeah, I really hope you like the end result. It was a great production to work with, and hopefully I managed to improve it even further. And yeah, I will try to keep up with these explaining videos, both as the session uploads, and yeah, see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.